Hey Hotties, welcome back to the Real House Guest of North Hollywood. I am your host, Carson Frey. It's another book club episode. Today is the World Series. The Dodgers and I was going to say the Mets, the Yankees are playing in LA, and I also voted. So, go LA, yay sports, and go vote. So we got all that housekeeping out of the way. So let's talk our book club. You Can't Have It All by Stassi Schroeder. So just to kind of start off, I really, really enjoyed this book. I am a Stassi fan. Everyone has a lot of different points of view on her, but so years ago, before I was into Bravo, I found Straight Up with Stassi, her podcast, and I would listen to it not knowing what Vanderpump Rules was, just because I found her like relatable, funny. I liked her fashion, like how she talked about stuff, and I just thought she was a cool girl. And then later, like, I started watching Housewives. I was like, oh yeah, that Stassi girl's on a Bravo show, and oh, so good. Okay, so this is Stassi's third book. It's her second book since she's left Vanderpump, but this is more her book that's about motherhood, about her life post Vanderpump. And it is an advice book in a way. Like, each kind of chapter is like a little essay and then it ends with a takeaway, like, this is the advice, you can do this. And it kind of is her overall like philosophy. So it really introduces the book by introducing that philosophy, and just kind of going over all the pressures women face and day to day. And she really, really emphasizes that it's okay for women to make certain choices, and it's like unattainable to strive perfection. Then she like goes into talking about her childhood. She highlighted all of her dreams and aspirations as a kid, and then she reflected on like her family dynamics growing up and how that kind of influenced her own ambition. Like, she talked about a stepmother she had. She talked about how her mother worked and what she took away, what was like reflected back to her, and kind of really kind of introduced like, you got to work, you got to do this, you got to do that. And also her relationship to authority figures, which I think is interesting if you look at in context to like Lisa Vanderpump. And then, so the next chapter after that really kind of broke down her experience on VPR, and it focused on the highs and the lows. Is there a lot of both? She discusses this, the challenges of being in the spotlight and kind of how warped reality TV like made her brain in a way. Like, how when people talk, like how they film the confessionals and they talk about things that happen as if they're the main character and it's all happening to them. She talked about how that affected her psyche, especially because she was so young when she started the show. I mean, she was, I think, 23 in the first season. And then she kind of delved into more of her like romantic relationships, and she like recounted her journey of love and heartbreak. Yes, she mentions Patrick, but also Jax a little bit too. And she really kind of breaks down her struggle with self-worth and how that was being reflected directly in the relationships, and how she, from those past relationship, it really taught her boundaries. And then she talks about how her career and her ambitions, like beyond reality TV, and she highlighted kind of hard work and kind of what it is navigating the entertainment industry, and also the complexities of friendship. And she really breaks down the complexities of friendships now that she's a mom. So she has all these like different like little chapters, but then she has lists in it. One of my favorite of her lists are like different kinds of like mom friends. I'm not a parent. I just found it so funny and relatable. um, and she also, another thing I want to mention in this is she really kind of breaks down like her trust issues in relationship to like her experiences on reality TV and like, betrayal and all those feelings of her needing like really secure, safe people now. And then she also broke down like her cancellation a little bit. If you want a full breakdown, read for her second book, Off With Her Head. But she kind of talked about how it led to a lot of personal growth, and she shares her experiences of opening up to others and sharing deeper connections. My favorite chapter, though, was about her mental health battles. She shares her own, grief stories. She lost a teacher that was really, really important and significant to her. And she really goes into detail about that. And, anxiety, depression. And when most reality stars talking about mental health, they're like, I have depression. Like, she went in detail. And she also talked about the importance of actual self-care, and self-care not being just like, oh, eye mask, but like what that really looks like. This was my favorite chapter in the book just because I related so deeply. So this is the section I'm going to read out loud. I would be sure to cut myself in places I thought were hidden. I have scars all over my hips and upper thighs, and one particularly large scar on my right ankle from when I was hospitalized. Yes, you read that correctly. I cut myself so deep that my boyfriend at the time had to take me to the hospital. That was probably my first true experience with humiliation and shame. I don't even think there's a word that can describe how it feels for nurses and doctors to look you in the eyes and admit that you did that to yourself. After that experience, I admitted it to my parents and did everything to try to control it. They weren't angry, they just jumped into action to try to help me. At this point, I hadn't considered Adderall could be feeling this. I'm very fortunate to have parents who have always prioritized my mental health. My first memory is being in therapy at age 5 when my parents got divorced. They always took my feelings and moods seriously. I always felt like my feelings were valid. I never felt if I did just buck up and get on with it. They always listened and tried to help. I remember one specific night where I tried everything not to cut myself. I chopped off my hair instead and ripped down my curtains and the curtain rods from the walls. I called my dad sobbing, and he flew me out to take me to some specialist who was using new technology to monitor the brain in patients dealing with mental health problems. At these appointments, they would place wires all over my scalp, and I would listen, and I would sit and listen to weird sounds. After a handful of sessions, somehow, based on which areas of my brain were lighting up during the session, they were able to tell me I didn't suffer from depression. I suffered from anxiety. My dad got a life coach in addition to a therapist. I tried different medications. I went through long stretches where I felt fine. But every now and then I would experience something that was too painful and the cutting would creep back in. It always felt like a dirty secret. It wasn't until I met Bo that I was able to stop cutting and quitting Adderall. And then she kind of really tells the story of actual dark passengering, and we've seen some of it on Vanderpump, but she went into detail. Like, I rage texted and called Bo over and over on repeat because I was angry he had gone to dinner and so staying back with me. I'm talking almost 100 crazy texts and nonstop calling back to back. I was feral. And then later on in this chapter, she talks about how she thought this part of herself that gave her so much shame and humiliation was really fueled by like trust issues and alcohol. But then she talked about seeing similar emotions come up in her daughter, and her daughter is sober. And, maybe some of that's just all within us. And I just related, and reading it out loud, like when I got the book, I knew that chapter was in there and I wanted to just fly to it. But then when I actually got there, because it's at the end of the book, I was just crying. I couldn't stop crying reading it because, like, I haven't self-harmed in the way Stassi described, but I have felt a lot of the feelings and I felt shame for them. And getting to read it, it took away shame from me. And you guys will see later on, my grandma and I talk about it, and saying it out loud to her, I'm crying now because it just, shame is a powerful feeling, and the more we can take it away from especially women, It's powerful. So Stassi really does challenge just any traditional notion of success, and she really kind of advocates for a more personalized definition because it is different for everyone, and she really encourages like what makes you happy. And she explores this concept of like work-life balance, and she really is like, yeah, it's an inevitable trade-off, you know if you want to be a great wife and a great mother, you might not be the best friend, and that's okay. She's kind of being like, that is okay because you can't do all the things all the time. Sometimes you just have to do a couple things really well. And then she kind of stresses this idea that perfection is simply an illusion. um, and it's really this embrace on like flaws and everyone's journey. And then she kind of shares her philosophy on taking risks, her own experiences, jumping out of her comfort zone. And in the final chapter, she really enforces her central message, which it's okay to not know everything. You don't have to figure everything out. It's okay. Um, so yeah, I love this book. I hope you guys all buy it, read it. It's a New York Times bestseller. And yeah, I would like to introduce my Grammy once again for our conversation about You Can't Have It All. I loved reading this with Grammie because, again, you guys, she's never seen anything on Bravo, no idea who Stassi is. So Grammie's opinion is so unbiased. It's not even funny. But I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Per usual, comment on this saying, oh my God, Grammie's so cool. I love Grammie. Grammie's the best. Much love, everyone. Hi, welcome back to the Real Housecast of North Hollywood. It's our special book club. Today we are going to be continuing the discussion on You Can't Have It All by Stassi Schroeder, and I have my Grammie here once again to break it down. Thank you for being here, Grammie. Thank you for reading the book with me again. I love doing this with you.
I enjoy it so much, Carson, and I thank you for having me on.
Oh. So, just to start off with, did you have any impression of Stassi prior to reading this book? Had you ever heard of Vanderpump Rules?
No, I haven't, other than what you've told me. No, but I knew nothing about it. And I will say that when I first started reading it, I thought, okay, this is geared strictly for Carson. I'm not going to find anything in it of interest. But I read it, and my mind changed.
What changed about it? Like what kind of was the biggest surprise with that?
Well, she's writing from the viewpoint of a young mother.
Mhm.
And while a lot of the terminology she uses, I had no idea what she was talking about. I'd never heard the term girl boss or OOTD or FOM,
Yeah.
Paris filter. I mean, a lot of terminology. But the emotions and what it's like to have small children, I identified with so completely. And it brought back a lot of memories.
Yeah. Cuz I guess like yeah, certain things might be, with this generation or that generation, but I feel like motherhood is so universal,
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it really is.
And as someone who doesn't have kids, I sometimes think of, like, being a mom as this, like, secret that other women have, and it's like, part of me, it's like, "Do I wanna have kids? Do I not wanna have kids?" And there's this part of me that's like, "I wanna know the secret that bonds all these women so much." Like, what is it, the secret? What do you think, though since Stassi has written 2 other books, what do you think kinda motivated her to tell this part of her story?
Well, I'm not sure, but I do feel like she was very honestly describing all the emotions involved in having children and
Mhm.
what it does to your life, because it does. It's a major milestone in your life and totally changes everything.
Mhm.
And so I think she just felt, I don't know what her last books were about, but she felt like that she needs to go on and describe this.
Yeah. Her first book was, I believe we'll read it at some point, called, like, The Basic Bitch Boss Guide or something, like, kind of very opposite of what this book was, and then her second book was called Off with Their Head, and the cover, she's, like, dressed like Marie Antoinette, and it was when she was canceled.
Okay.
Um but yeah, I agree that this there's something about the juxtaposition of someone like I knew who Stassi was before I even watched Vanderpump Rules. Like I listened to her podcast when I was in college because I just always thought she was funny and relatable. And I find it interesting that I don't have kids and I'm still relating to her. You know, that kind of universal of, yeah, I don't always know what I'm doing. Um, do you what do you think of her experience those like, what was different about what you faced at her age and what was, like, similar?
Well, I think, of course, I was a young mother in the '60s. And
Mhm,
back then, my generation, we were so tired of being housewives, and everybody kept telling us you can have it all. You can go to
mhm,
work and have a family and so forth. So I was of that generation where unfortunately we perpetuated that whole idea that, yeah, you can have it all. And I like where she says, yes, you can have it all, but not all of the time. And I think that's what we missed out on, that
mhm.
no, you can't do it all the time. And you've got to have some help, either a spouse or hired help or something. And,
Yeah.
but yeah, that really hit me that, oh dear, we started this whole idea of telling our girls you can have it all, and
But I think the myth continues even not just your generation, but even how, like, she's a millennial. So millennials, like, that's their the Instagram. That is their generation is Instagram. So you're posting and showing and, like, that's what I took away is, like, oh, when you're seeing people with their children and their beautiful husband on beautiful vacations, you're not seeing the parts of that are hard, you know? So we're not thinking about everyone else having a hard time. We think it's only us.
oh, that's so true. I remember that feeling of, oh, I'm a terrible mother. First of all, my family always told me I shouldn't have children because I'd be a terrible mother. And so I
Mhm,
was so petrified anytime. I'll never remember my son having a tantrum in public and walking out of a store with him and just dying. I thought I was the worst mother in the world. And
mhm.
that's where hearing her tell her story, I think, oh, wow, that should give a lot of mothers hope that they aren't the only ones. And you don't have
Yeah.
to be perfect all the time.
Yeah, like, the story when she talked about on Mother's Day, like, coming home, finally seeing her kid, and then just her daughter throwing a tantrum, like, only wanting dad, and, like, how she felt like, I got my Mother's Day snuggles, but I had to work for it. But it's also, like, she chose to have kids, and sometimes kids, they're not just there to love you, they're here because you put them here, you know?
That's
So,
right.
I um, how do you think, though, reality TV has shaped Stassi's narrative? Like, do you think it's an accurate representation of her life? What do you think of that?
Oh, I think this book, she was very honest with what's happening in her life, and
Mhm.
I think she was did a good job of describing all of her emotions and her feelings, and
Yeah, I one thing I like about her is, like, something my mom always says is, "To thine own self be true." Like, be authentic to yourself, be true to yourself, and I think that's, like, her strongest thing in the book is that she feels very true to herself in all the parts of it, and
yes,
that's what I took away.
I didn't feel like she was trying to impress us with how wonderful she is. She was saying, "Here's how it is, folks, good, bad, and ugly."
Yeah. Yeah. Was there any, like, advice or insight do you think is applicable to your life now or, like, my life now? Like, what advice do you think? Because it's an advice book, you know?
Well, it is, and I there, she. said several things that I thought were good as far as don't pay any attention to what other people think about you. I think that is so important, and I need to keep remembering that because there are times I think, "Oh dear, if I do this, there people are gonna dislike me or make fun of me or so forth." And so I thought that was such an important message. And the other thing, one thing I hadn't thought about, but when she talked about jealousy, when you're jealous of a friend getting something like a promotion or so forth, then look at the whole thing and would you want their whole life? And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. That was like, "Oh my gosh, I'll try to remember that every time I see somebody get something that I would like to have."
I felt that too when she was like, "Imagine I don't have my kids, I don't have my husband, I don't have my friends." It's
Yes,
like, "Oh, yeah, like, no, I don't like, I'll take it all as long as I have my people," and I think sometimes in LA, people can talk about gratitude, and it can be very, like, woo-woo and kind of, like, I don't know, weird. But I think Stassi talks about gratitude in, like, an actual practical way that feels applicable, of not, like, just being grateful, but, like, no, this life gives you bad stuff, but also gives you your people, her husband, her children, her friends.
exactly. And because when I think about that, because um, when somebody has something I want, I often think, "Oh, I'd like to have that," but I don't want the rest of their life. I love my life. I was fortunate to have, 3 great kids and a great husband and a wonderful life and wonderful grandchildren. So, I wouldn't trade you for anything in the world, Carson.
Yeah, and I think that really, like, resonated for me the most because it's like, oh and I think kind of an overall theme of the book is, like, when we're living in a culture of excess, we want it all, but it's like but it's excessive. What do you think, though, is Stassi's most admirable quality? Do you think you would wanna know her?
Oh, I think she'd be delightful to be around. I mean, I can just she's funny. You were right about that. I mean, I really enjoyed the humor in the book too, and the
Oh,
way
yeah.
she talks about herself and that she doesn't put on airs and I like people who are genuine and I feel like she is. So I thought, yes, I would enjoy meeting her and I think, we're come from different places, so I'm not sure we'd be friends necessarily, but I sure would enjoy her. And it sounds like her husband is wonderful too.
Oh, yeah. I love them as a couple, and to me, she, like, really not inspires not the right word, but she's about 7 years older than me, and I used to date guys like she used to date, like, awful, narcissistic assholes, and then it seems like she finally started to believe in herself more, and so therefore she found a partner like that, and, like, seeing that in my own self being like, "Oh, yeah, like, I did similar things, and now I'm kind of on a similar track as Stassi," like, seeing that's cool as well.
It is, and I'm sure, this book appealed to both of us from different angles, but overall, I mean, she has such a good attitude. I like what she said about the momfluencers, that not to believe everything, and because I can fall into that thinking, "Oh, that's what everybody's doing," and, but they're just a fantasy and a source of fun, lighthearted entertainment. I thought that was perfect, and that's the way we should all view them.
My favorite chapter, though, was when she was talking about her, like, mental health journey and how motherhood changed that, and I think I was the most affected by it because it felt like one, like, very raw and honest, someone really, really discussing, like, not like, "Oh, I was depressed," but this is exactly how I was feeling, and then seeing how motherhood and her first her relationship, I would say, but then having kids kind of and it just made me very emotional. What was your response to that?
Oh my gosh. I I had trouble with depression in most of my life. And it's funny, some people just don't want to hear about it, don't talk about it, don't mention it. You know, take care of yourself, but don't tell anybody about it. So this to me was so refreshing to hear. Yes, because I mean, I can remember just getting so upset with my kids and taking all their toys and throwing them out in the driveway and screaming at them, which I'm so embarrassed about, but I would also get so depressed, and,
Mhm.
uh, and so I really like that part of it. Because we didn't used to when I was growing up, you didn't talk about mental health, and I
Mhm.
even remember when, I think someone running for vice president one time, they found out he had gone to a therapist, and so therefore he was out of the race. I
Mhm.
it was so bad back then when I was growing up. So it's really refreshing to hear her talk about it so honestly, because I
Yeah.
think most women go through a lot of that.
Yeah, and I've always like, I feel like I grew up in a generation where people would talk about mental health, but not as detailed as she was, and I appreciated how detailed it was in all parts of it because it takes away shame to me. Because it's like
Yes.
when she describes, like, Dark Passenger, and she, like, gave it a name, Dark Passenger.
Yes.
I was like, "I do that too. I've been a dark passenger, and I've flipped out emotionally, and I, like, used to feel like it was my fault, like, I just couldn't control how I was feeling, and but I think the way Stassi sees it is there's big trauma, big feelings, and your body doesn't know how to react, you know? And her talking about how she thought she was just drunk with trust issues, but then she saw it in her daughter, and she was like, "My daughter is sober." And she's a
Yes.
three-year-old who dark passengers. So it's like, okay, some of the stuff is just within us, and that's okay. And there's not shame in that, you know?
Oh, I love that part of it. I wish knowing what I know now, I could start all over again and probably deal
Yeah.
with a lot of things better now.
Yeah. It's having, like, the tools there, and also, when you were raising your kids, they didn't talk about generational trauma, you know? So I think that is a big difference. Um, what do you think, though like, let's talk about this book in relation to the other memoirs we read, like, what do you think your overall, like, impression of Stassi and You Can't Have It All will be comparatively?
Well, each one we've read has been totally different. I enjoyed the different ones all for different things. And this one was most of it was just pure entertainment. It was fun to read, and I would recommend to anybody if they want to have a light afternoon's reading. I shouldn't say light because she does deal with some heavy topics, but she
Yeah.
puts them in such a way that they are easy to read and understand, and so Carson, I've liked every single book we've read.
I agree. I think what I'm taking away that's different about this book, it doesn't feel like it's not a linear story, it's very much an essay book, and
Yeah.
so you're not getting a linear story I mean, kind of, her story of motherhood, but it's not like, "And this happened, and like, Carol's book was a lead up to, like, the death, you know?
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
like, da 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 da, and this is more like bump, 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 like,
Just
a
writing
little
her
funny.
thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. And it kinda felt like she was writing it to her best friend, and so you felt, like, so close to her reading it, or at least I did. Um,
It's like reading a journal of somebody's or
Anything else you liked, disliked, that we haven't discussed it? Like, were you glad you read it? Like, overall?
oh, I know one other thing she mentioned that she had mixed feelings. She wanted the baby, but yet
Mhm.
she was kind of mourning that life that she would no longer have.
Mhm.
And while I didn't have that with my children, I've had that same mixed feelings about other points in my life,
Mhm.
like, retiring or, losing my husband and moving back with the kids. Those sort of
Mhm.
things. I think anytime you have a major life event, and particularly kids, that's, a big change. And so, yeah, you miss those times, but that doesn't mean you don't like what you have now. And that's something
Yeah.
I think people always need to remember, that, like, I don't want to go back to, where I was before because I made a choice to come here.
Mhm.
So I kind of like that where she wrote about that.
Yeah.
Um,
I did too, and I related to it because it's just I think it's something I need to keep in mind and I need to hold on to as well, you know? Like
exactly.
you can't skip ahead and you can't go back. You kind of just have to be where you are and, see it for what it is. And it's something I'm fearful of motherhood in the sense of like not seeing my friends. And I liked how she was also open about how like it definitely changes your friendships. Because I think when people say no, like I still like when people say it doesn't, I'm like, you're lying. But then she talks about like creating mom friends and like it's like a whole nother world. So it's like, oh, when you're losing something, you're also gaining or experiencing
Yes,
something
that's it.
new.
Oh, and I
Yeah.
loved her description of the different kinds of moms. And I had to think, okay, now which kind was I? Because that was so true.
Which kind were you?
Oh, I don't remember. I didn't find one that matched me exactly. I
Yeah.
certainly was never a helicopter mom. I was pretty easygoing and laid back, but uh, it was fun to read her descriptions of them.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting too how she said her mom thought her parenting style is nuts. So it's like, oh, so it's like she's doing it differently, obviously, than her mom.
Right.
Um, when she talked about, she's like, yeah, I need the app. I'm all about the app. um, so I want to rate this book. We're doing out of five. Grammy, I love this book so much. And I'm a Stassi stan. I'm in Khaleesi. I love her. I give her five olives.
Okay, well, in this, I know this book was meant a little more to you than to me. Uh, I will give it 3 olives. So between the two of us, let's go for 4 olives.
Woo! Four
Whew.
olives for
Cheers.
Stassi. Cheers. Woo! Cheers to Stassi. If you want to read her book, it's called You Can't Have It All. It's a New York Times bestseller. And if you love Grammy, as you guys always do, comment saying how much you love Grammy. Thank you for being on, and bye, everyone.
Bye.